The story of Africa, from great kingdoms to a new dawn. Welcome to Fox Hub Video. Journey with us through the echoes of time as we uncover the untold history of Africa, a land of mighty kingdoms, groundbreaking innovations, and resilient people who shaped the world. From the grandeur of ancient civilizations to the modern renaissance of African identity and power, witness the transformation of a continent reclaiming its destiny. This is the story of Africa, from great kingdoms to a new dawn. Africa is a vast and ancient land, home to great civilizations, powerful leaders and deep traditions. Long before European explorers set foot on its shores, Africa was filled with mighty kingdoms, skilled artisans, wise scholars and bustling cities. It was a land of great wealth and culture where people traded gold, ivory and spices across vast deserts and rivers. But as time moved forward, Africa faced many challenges that would change its future forever. Centuries ago, Africa was home to rich and powerful empires that shaped the continent's history. Each kingdom had its own culture, traditions and way of life, but all shared a deep respect for their land and people. One of the greatest African empires was Mali, which rose to power in the 13th century in West Africa. Mali became famous for its gold mines, which made it one of the wealthiest places in the world. The great ruler, Mansa Musa, was so rich that when he traveled to Mecca on pilgrimage, he carried so much gold that he caused inflation in cities along the way. Under Mansa Musa, Timbuktu became a center of learning where scholars from across Africa and the Middle East came to study. The University of Sankore held thousands of books, and students studied astronomy, medicine and law. Mali was not just a kingdom of gold, it was a land of knowledge. In the south of Africa, the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe rose between the 11th and 15th centuries. It was a powerful trading empire, known for its huge stone walls and towers, which still stand today. The people of Great Zimbabwe controlled trade routes and exchanged gold, ivory and precious goods with merchants from as far away as China and India. The stone city was an architectural marvel, built without cement, but still standing strong after centuries. It showed the world that Africa had its own great builders and engineers. To the west, the Benin Kingdom in present-day Nigeria flourished between the 13th and 19th centuries. The people of Benin were known for their incredible bronze sculptures and plaques, which told the stories of their kings and warriors. These artworks were so detailed and lifelike that Europeans who saw them for the first time could hardly believe they were made in Africa. The Benin Kingdom was a warrior state, with powerful kings called the Obas. They ruled with wisdom and strength, keeping their kingdom safe and prosperous. For many centuries, Africa had traded goods with the rest of the world, exchanging gold, spices and textiles with Europe, the Middle East and Asia. But in the 15th century, a dark period began, one that would tear families apart and reshape Africa forever. In the late 1400s, Portuguese explorers arrived on Africa's coasts. They were looking for gold, spices and new lands. At first, the trade between Africans and Europeans was peaceful. But soon, the Europeans saw another resource they could exploit: people. By the 16th century, the transatlantic slave trade had begun. European traders, along with some African rulers, captured and sold millions of African men, women and children. These captives were forced onto ships and sent across the ocean to work on plantations in the Americas. The journey across the Atlantic, called the Middle Passage, was horrific. People were packed into ships, chained together with little food or water. Many did not survive the journey. Those who did were sold into slavery, forced to work under brutal conditions with no freedom. The slave trade weakened Africa's kingdoms. Some leaders resisted, fighting against the European traders. Others became involved, trading captives for weapons and goods. Communities were torn apart, villages were emptied, and entire cultures were disrupted. For over 300 years, Africa suffered under this trade. Millions of strong young men and women were lost, and the continent struggled to recover. By the 19th century, the slave trade was slowly ending, but Africa's troubles were not over. European countries now wanted to control land, resources, and people in Africa. In 1884, European leaders met in Berlin to decide how they would divide Africa among themselves. This meeting, called the Berlin Conference, took place without a single African leader present. The Europeans drew maps, creating new borders and claiming different parts of Africa as their own. Soon, British, French, German, Portuguese and Belgian armies marched into Africa, taking over lands and forcing African people to follow foreign laws. Colonization was a difficult period for Africa. European rulers controlled land, forced Africans to work on plantations and in mines, and imposed heavy taxes. Traditional African leaders were removed and foreign governments made all the decisions. Africans resisted. In Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II led his people to victory against the Italians at the Battle of Adidabua in 1896, proving that Africa would not surrender without a fight. Other resistance movements spread across the continent, but many were crushed by European military forces. Even though colonial rule was harsh, African people never gave up hope. They remembered the greatness of their ancestors, the kings of Mali, the warriors of Benin, the scholars of Timbuktu. They knew that one day Africa would rise again. In the 20th century, the winds of change began to blow. Africans started to demand their freedom. They formed political groups, organized protests, and fought for their rights. Some leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and Patrice Lumumba of the Congo would play a major role in this struggle for independence. But the fight for freedom would not be easy. Would Africa succeed in breaking free from European rule? The story of Africa does not end here. It is only just beginning. As the 20th century unfolded, Africa stood on the edge of great change. The calls for independence grew louder, and Africans were ready to reclaim their lands, traditions and power. But the journey to freedom would not be easy. Colonizers would not leave without a fight, and new challenges lay ahead. How would Africa overcome these struggles? For many years, Africans had been forced to live under colonial rule. Their lands were taken, their cultures suppressed, and their people treated as second-class citizens. However, whispers of resistance had always been present. From the moment European powers took control, many Africans resisted in different ways. Some fought with weapons, while others used words, organization, and diplomacy. World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, played a major role in Africa's path to independence. Many African soldiers were recruited to fight for their colonial rulers in Europe and Asia. They fought bravely, believing that their sacrifices would earn them greater respect and rights when they returned home. But after the war ended, they found that little had changed. At the same time, European countries were weakened by the war. They had spent so much money on fighting that they could no longer afford to hold on to their colonies. This created an opportunity for African leaders to push harder for independence. In the 1950s and 60s, strong African leaders emerged to guide their people toward freedom. They inspired their nations with powerful speeches, peaceful protests, and sometimes even armed struggles. Across the continent, many key figures led independence movements. These leaders, with their determination and vision, paved the way for a new era in Africa. They faced immense challenges, but remained steadfast in their pursuit of liberty and self-governance. One of the first African countries to gain independence was Ghana, formerly known as the Gold Coast. Kwame Nkrumah was a key leader in this fight. He believed in the power of unity and the idea that Africans could rule themselves. Nkrumah led strikes, protests and political campaigns demanding that the British leave Ghana. Finally, on March 6, 1957, Ghana became the first African country south of the Sahara to gain independence. Nkrumah declared, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked to the total liberation of Africa." This inspired other African nations to continue their struggles for freedom. In Kenya, the road to independence was much harder. The British had taken large amounts of land from the Kenyan people and given it to European settlers. This led to the rise of the Mau Mau rebellion, where Kenyan fighters waged a guerrilla war against the British. Jomo Kenyatta, a leader in Kenya's independence movement, was arrested and imprisoned for several years. But the Kenyan people did not give up. After years of resistance, Kenya finally gained independence on December 12, 1963, with Kenyatta becoming the first president. In Congo, the fight for independence was also filled with struggles. Patrice Lumumba became a symbol of Congo's resistance against Belgian rule. In 1960, Congo gained independence, but soon after, Lumumba was overthrown and assassinated with the involvement of foreign powers. The journey to independence was just the beginning. Newly independent nations faced a myriad of challenges, from building stable governments to fostering economic growth. The path forward was uncertain, but the spirit of resilience and hope remained strong. His tragic death showed how dangerous the path to freedom could be. However, his dream of a united and strong Congo lived on in the hearts of many. As more countries gained independence, a wave of freedom spread across the continent. Between 1957 and 1975, most African nations had freed themselves from European rule. Some countries achieved independence peacefully through negotiations, like Tanzania under Julius Nyerere. Others had to fight long and bloody wars, like Algeria, which fought the French in a war that lasted from 1954 to 1962 and cost millions of lives. By the mid-1970s, almost all African nations were free. However, independence was only the beginning of a new struggle. With independence came new challenges. African leaders now had to build strong nations, create fair governments, and improve the lives of their people. But the effects of colonial rule had left deep wounds. The newly independent African nations faced complex issues with borders, economies, and foreign interference. The arbitrary borders drawn during colonial times often led to conflicts. Economies that were heavily dependent on single commodities struggled to diversify, and of course foreign powers continued to meddle, seeking to maintain their influence. One of the biggest problems was that European colonizers had drawn borders without considering Africa's ethnic groups. This meant that some nations had many different groups with different languages and traditions, leading to conflicts. For example, in Nigeria, tensions between different ethnic groups led to a civil war known as the Biafra War, which lasted from 1967 to 1970, resulting in over 1 million deaths. Similar conflicts happened in other parts of Africa. Many African countries had economies built to serve European interests. Their resources were taken to Europe, and they depended on foreign goods. After independence, they had to find ways to build strong economies, but this was not easy. Some leaders tried socialist policies while others followed capitalist models, but progress was slow. Even though Africa had gained political independence, many powerful countries continued to interfere in its affairs. Some African leaders were removed by foreign-backed coups, while others were influenced by Cold War politics between the United States and the Soviet Union. For example, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, who tried to make his country self-sufficient, was assassinated in 1987, likely with foreign involvement. Despite these struggles, Africa remained strong. The spirit of its people never faded. Leaders like Nelson Mandela of South Africa fought against apartheid, a system of racial segregation, and after decades of struggle, apartheid ended in 1994, making Mandela the country's first black president. Africans also took pride in their cultures, traditions and unity. The African Union, or AU, was formed to bring countries together and solve common problems. As the 21st century began, Africa stood at a crossroads. The past was filled with pain, but the future held great possibilities. Many countries were growing economically, technology was improving, and young Africans were taking charge of their futures. But challenges remained. How would Africa continue to grow? How would it solve issues of poverty, corruption, and conflict? The journey of Africa was far from over. Would Africa rise to become as great as it once was in the time of its mighty kingdoms? The story of Africa does not end here. It is only just beginning. The next chapter of Africa's history would be written by its people. The 21st century marked the rise of a new African consciousness, one rooted in self-determination, innovation and resilience. This era would be shaped by a young and dynamic population, technological revolutions and a renewed emphasis on unity and sustainable growth. Africa's youth emerged as the driving force behind transformation. With a median age of just 19, the continent held an immense demographic advantage. This new generation was highly educated, tech-savvy, and determined to build a future that reflected Africa's aspirations rather than external influences. Young entrepreneurs launched startups, engineers developed homegrown technological solutions, and artists used their craft to challenge stereotypes and reclaim African narratives. The expansion of digital technology reshaped industries from agriculture and healthcare to finance and education. African-led innovations such as drone technology for medical supply deliveries in Rwanda and blockchain solutions for secure land ownership signaled a shift towards homegrown progress. Tech hubs like Yabakan Valley in Nigeria and iHub in Kenya attracted investment and nurtured groundbreaking ideas. The push for STEM education became a cornerstone of development. Governments and private institutions invested in training programs, scholarships and incubators to equip young Africans with the necessary skills to thrive in the digital economy. African universities strengthened their curricula, collaborating with international institutions to ensure students were competitive in the global job market. Recognizing the consequences of climate change, Africa embraced sustainable initiatives. Countries invested in renewable energy, with solar and wind power projects rising across the Sahel and East Africa. The Great Green Wall project, spanning from Senegal to Djibouti, sought to combat desertification and restore biodiversity. In urban centres, smart city projects integrated green infrastructure, public transportation and waste management solutions. Nations collaborated on creating resilient food systems, reducing dependency on foreign imports, and ensuring food security for their growing populations. The call for stronger governance and accountability grew louder as citizens demanded an end to corruption and inefficiency. Political parties shifted toward transparency, with some nations implementing digital voting systems and AI-driven anti-corruption measures to curb electoral fraud. Africa also took greater ownership of its peacekeeping efforts. The African Union expanded its role in mediating conflicts, ensuring regional disputes were resolved internally without excessive foreign intervention. The rise of regional economic blocs, such as the East African Community and Economic Community of West African States, strengthened diplomatic ties and encouraged collaboration. Africa's influence on global culture intensified. The rise of Afrobeats, led by artists like Burna Boy and Wizkid, brought African sounds to international audiences. Nollywood, Nigeria's film industry, became the second largest in the world, showcasing African storytelling on a grand scale. Fashion designers from Senegal to South Africa blended traditional African patterns with modern styles, influencing global trends. African literature gained recognition, with authors like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Ngugi wa Thiong'o addressing themes of identity, colonial history, and the African experience in the modern world. The movement to decolonize education and historical narratives gained momentum. African historians challenged Eurocentric perspectives, rewriting the history books to accurately reflect the achievements of ancient civilizations, the resilience of indigenous cultures, and the depth of African philosophies and governance systems. As globalization deepened, Africa's role on the world stage became more pronounced. Countries sought new alliances beyond their former colonial rulers. China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, brought massive infrastructure investments into Africa, building roads, railways and ports. However, concerns over debt dependency and economic sovereignty emerged as some nations struggled to repay loans. The continent also strengthened ties with the United States, Europe and other emerging economies. African leaders demanded fair trade deals, investment in local industries, and the end of exploitative practices by multinational corporations. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in 2021, aimed to create the largest free trade area in the world, boosting intra-African commerce and reducing reliance on foreign markets. While Africa had made remarkable progress, deep-seated challenges remained. Climate change, rising temperatures, desertification and unpredictable rainfall threatened food security and livelihoods. Efforts to promote renewable energy and sustainable agriculture became urgent priorities. Youth unemployment, with over 60% of Africa's population under the age of 25, creating jobs and opportunities for the next generation was crucial to preventing social unrest. Health crises, diseases such as malaria, HIV, AIDS and the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the need for stronger healthcare systems and local pharmaceutical industries. Security concerns, extremist groups, piracy and cyber threats posed ongoing risks to national stability. Collaborative security initiatives and investment in defense technology became critical. Africa's story was far from over. The resilience, innovation and cultural wealth of its people positioned the continent for a future of self-reliance, economic empowerment and global influence. The challenges were immense, but so were the possibilities. Would Africa rise to reclaim its place as a great civilization, leading the world in innovation, culture and governance? Could it overcome the remnants of its painful past to forge a prosperous and united future? The journey continued. Africa stood at the crossroads of history, looking ahead to the next phase of its development. Leaders, scholars and citizens envisioned a continent where political stability, economic prosperity and cultural resurgence intertwined to create a truly independent Africa. The rise of artificial intelligence, automation and digital economies presented both opportunities and challenges for Africa. Nations that embraced these advancements were poised to leapfrog traditional development models, creating smart cities, digital economies and innovative governance systems. African entrepreneurs explored space technology, with Nigeria, South Africa and Egypt investing in satellite programs for communication, navigation and agricultural development. Tech-driven education platforms provided millions of young Africans with access to knowledge and skills once out of reach. With the African Continental Free Trade Area in full effect, African businesses sought to break down trade barriers, streamline logistics, and foster a continental supply chain. The vision was an Africa that produced, manufactured, and consumed its own goods, reducing dependency on external markets. The dream of a unified African currency gained momentum, with discussions on a digital African currency backed by blockchain technology. Such an innovation would facilitate smoother cross-border trade and financial independence. Beyond economics, the push for African unity continued. Efforts to enhance cultural exchange, promote indigenous languages and strengthen regional ties became central to the vision of a new Africa. The dream of a politically and economically integrated Africa, envisioned by leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, remained alive. Would Africa achieve its grand vision? The world watched as the continent shaped its destiny step by step. Africa's path to a new horizon. The story of Africa did not end with independence or economic resurgence. It was a tale that continued to unfold, shaped by the hopes, struggles, and triumphs of its people. As the 21st century progressed, Africa stood at a crossroads where history, culture, and modernity converged, creating new challenges and opportunities. With a youthful population, rapid technological advancements, and shifting global alliances, the continent had the potential to redefine its future on its own terms. Africa's greatest resource was not its gold, diamonds, or oil. It was its people, particularly its youth. With more than 60% of the population under the age of 25, Africa had the youngest demographic in the world. The question remained, how could this demographic dividend be harnessed for long-term prosperity? Education reform became a key focus. Governments and private institutions prioritized investments in STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics education, ensuring that young Africans were equipped with the skills needed for the digital economy. Online education platforms, some developed locally, bridged the gap in accessibility, making knowledge more available than ever before. Youth entrepreneurship flourished, supported by innovation hubs in cities such as Nairobi, Lagos and Cape Town. Local startups addressed issues unique to the continent. Agritech firms revolutionized farming. Fintech companies provided banking solutions to the unbanked, and clean energy startups tackled power shortages. With opportunities came challenges. Unemployment remained high, forcing many young Africans to seek opportunities abroad, fueling a brain drain that robbed the continent of its brightest minds. Efforts were made to reverse this trend by creating an enabling environment for businesses, increasing job opportunities, and investing in research and development. Technology was reshaping Africa faster than ever. The spread of mobile technology and internet connectivity transformed the way people did business, learned, and engaged with the world. In many regions, mobile banking replaced traditional banking, allowing millions access to financial services for the first time. M-Pesa, a mobile money transfer system pioneered in Kenya, became a model for the world. E-commerce platforms connected local artisans and entrepreneurs with global markets, allowing African-made products to reach international buyers without the need for intermediaries. This shift empowered small businesses and promoted African craftsmanship on a global scale. Social media played a dual role. While it empowered young Africans with a voice, spreading awareness on political and social issues, it also contributed to digital misinformation. Governments wrestled with balancing freedom of speech and curbing online propaganda, with some nations resorting to internet shutdowns during elections or crises. For centuries, Africa had been dependent on raw material exports, a practice that limited its economic potential. Leaders realized that true prosperity required moving beyond resource extraction toward industrialization and value addition. Instead of exporting raw cocoa beans, countries like Ghana and Ivory Coast focused on chocolate production. Instead of shipping crude oil, Nigeria and Angola worked to refine and process petroleum products locally. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, became a game-changer, creating the largest single market in the world. By eliminating trade barriers and encouraging intra-African commerce, AfCFTA aimed to reduce dependency on foreign markets. African nations began sourcing goods and services from within the continent, strengthening regional economies and boosting job creation. Still, challenges persisted. Infrastructure deficits, high tariffs, and political disagreements slowed full implementation. Yet the vision remained: a self-reliant Africa trading within itself, producing its own goods and driving its own economic agenda. Africa bore the brunt of climate change despite contributing the least to global carbon emissions. Rising temperatures, desertification and erratic rainfall threatened agriculture, which remained the backbone of many economies. The Great Green Wall project, an ambitious initiative stretching across the Sahel, aimed to combat desertification and restore degraded lands. Renewable energy investments surged as countries harnessed solar, wind and hydropower to address energy deficits. Morocco built one of the world's largest solar farms, while Kenya and Ethiopia expanded geothermal and wind energy projects. These initiatives not only reduced reliance on fossil fuels, but also provided sustainable power to millions. However, the transition was not without obstacles. Funding remained a major hurdle, as many African nations still depended on external loans for infrastructure development. Balancing economic growth with environmental conservation required long-term planning and a commitment to green policies. As the world's economies shifted, Africa found itself at the center of global interest. China's Belt and Road Initiative brought investments in roads, ports and railways, yet concerns over debt dependency and economic sovereignty loomed. The United States, European Union and emerging powers like India and Turkey increased diplomatic ties, eager to engage in trade and strategic partnerships. The Africa Union, or AU, took a more assertive role in foreign affairs, negotiating trade deals and advocating for a more balanced international economic order. African leaders demanded fairer trade agreements, pushing back against exploitative practices that had historically disadvantaged the continent. One of the most transformative moves was the increasing push for a pan-African digital currency, a concept aimed at eliminating dependency on Western-controlled financial systems. The potential of blockchain-based African currencies sparked debates. Could Africa finally break free from economic structures that had long placed it at a disadvantage? The world increasingly turned to Africa for cultural inspiration. Afrobeats, African fashion, literature and cinema reached unprecedented levels of global recognition. The influence of African art and storytelling extended beyond the continent, inspiring films, music and books worldwide. The movement to decolonize African history and education gained momentum. Scholars and historians worked to correct centuries-old narratives, ensuring that African achievements, from the pyramids of Sudan to the advanced metallurgy of the Great Zimbabwe Kingdom, were recognized as integral to human history. Festivals celebrating African heritage, from FESPACO, Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou, to Lagos Fashion Week, showcased the creativity and ingenuity of African artists. Traditional languages saw a revival, with young Africans embracing indigenous dialects in literature, music, and daily life. Despite challenges, Africa's story remained one of resilience, ambition, and transformation. The foundation had been laid for a continent that could compete on the global stage, not as a subject of foreign influence, but as an equal partner in world affairs. The questions lingered. Would Africa fully embrace its potential and lead a new era of economic and technological independence? Could it overcome internal divisions and external pressures to forge a truly unified and self-sustaining future? The answers lay in the hands of its people. As Africa moved deeper into the 21st century, the echoes of its past intertwined with the pulse of the present, crafting a future shaped by resilience, ambition, and innovation. The continent, often seen through the lens of its struggles, was now commanding attention as a center of progress, cultural renaissance, and geopolitical influence. With its youthful population, technological advancements, and a renewed sense of unity, Africa was on the path to redefining its place in the global order. While Africa's post-independence era was marred by political instability, military coups, and authoritarian regimes, a new wave of democratic awakening had begun to take root. Many nations were transitioning from political turmoil to stable governance, with a focus on strengthening democratic institutions. Regional bodies like the African Union played a pivotal role in advocating for democratic reforms, ensuring free and fair elections, and mediating conflicts to maintain peace. Countries such as Ghana, Botswana, and Namibia became models of good governance, proving that democracy could thrive in African soil. However, challenges persisted. Electoral fraud, corruption, and political violence still threatened democratic stability in some regions. The fight against corruption intensified as new policies and digital transparency initiatives were introduced, enabling citizens to hold their governments accountable. Platforms leveraging blockchain technology emerged, ensuring that public funds were traceable and protected from embezzlement. The role of youth in governance also expanded, with younger politicians, activists, and reformists challenging the status quo. Social media campaigns and grassroots movements became powerful tools in holding leaders accountable, demonstrating that the African people were no longer willing to be passive spectators in their political destiny. Africa's economic landscape was shifting from dependency on raw material exports to self-sustaining industrialization. The Fourth Industrial Revolution brought new opportunities in artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, and big data analytics, enabling Africa to leapfrog traditional developmental stages. In major cities like Nairobi, Johannesburg, Kigali, and Accra, tech hubs emerged as incubators for young African innovators, fostering groundbreaking solutions in fintech, health tech, and agri-tech. Mobile money platforms like M-Pesa continued to expand, revolutionizing banking systems and empowering small businesses to thrive in both urban and rural areas. With the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, intra-African trade experienced an unprecedented boost. Borders became more open, allowing goods, services, and talent to flow seamlessly across countries. The reduction of tariffs enabled African businesses to expand their reach, leading to a surge in locally manufactured products. However, economic growth was not without its setbacks. Infrastructure gaps, bureaucratic red tape, and access to financing continued to slow progress. But Africa was adapting, investing heavily in renewable energy, smart infrastructure, and digital economies to overcome these obstacles and ensure sustainable development. A reimagined education system was central to Africa's transformation. Governments, private organizations, and international partners invested heavily in higher education, vocational training, and digital learning platforms. Universities across the continent prioritized research in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, ensuring that Africa's youth were not just consumers, but also creators of technology. In rural areas, e-learning programs provided children with access to quality education, reducing illiteracy rates and preparing the next generation for the demands of the modern workforce. Tech giants partnered with African governments to roll out digital literacy programs, ensuring that even the most marginalized communities could benefit from technological advancements. African culture was no longer confined to the continent. It was influencing the world in unprecedented ways. Afrobeats music, African fashion, Nollywood films, and indigenous storytelling gained international acclaim, reshaping global perspectives on Africa. The demand for African heritage and craftsmanship surged, with global brands collaborating with African designers, artists, and musicians. Major streaming platforms featured African films and music, while literary works from African authors received international recognition, breaking stereotypes and telling authentic African stories. Furthermore, efforts to decolonize education and history intensified. African scholars pushed for the inclusion of Africa's vast contributions to world civilization in global academic curricula, ensuring that future generations would learn about the ingenuity of African empires, scientific discoveries, and philosophical contributions. The COVID-19 pandemic was a wake-up call that emphasized the need for Africa to build self-sufficient healthcare systems. Lessons learned from the pandemic prompted investments in vaccine production, biotechnology, and modern healthcare infrastructure. Nations such as South Africa and Senegal became pioneers in vaccine research, ensuring that Africa no longer had to depend solely on foreign aid during global health crises. Additionally, breakthroughs in telemedicine allowed remote communities access to quality healthcare services, bridging the medical gap between urban and rural populations. The eradication of diseases like polio, Ebola, and malaria remained a top priority. With improved sanitation, vaccination campaigns, and the use of AI in disease prediction, Africa made significant strides in combating long-standing health challenges. As climate change continued to threaten Africa's ecosystems, leaders sought solutions that balanced economic growth with environmental conservation. The Great Green Wall Initiative, a massive tree planting project spanning across the Sahel, helped combat desertification, restore degraded lands, and improve food security. Renewable energy projects, including solar farms, wind turbines, and hydroelectric plants, reduced Africa's reliance on fossil fuels, making sustainable energy more accessible. Countries like Ethiopia and Morocco became global leaders in green energy, proving that Africa could be at the forefront of climate-friendly innovations. Despite progress, challenges such as deforestation, illegal mining, and plastic pollution still needed urgent attention. However, the rise of eco-entrepreneurs, young Africans developing sustainable businesses, offered hope for a greener, cleaner future. For decades, Africa was seen as a recipient of global aid, but this narrative was rapidly changing. African nations now played a key role in shaping global policies, advocating for fair trade, and forming strategic alliances. The continent's vast natural resources, coupled with its growing economic influence, positioned it as a key player in international negotiations on trade, climate change, and security. The African Union took bold steps in mediating conflicts, ensuring peace, and positioning Africa as a united front in global diplomacy. A major milestone was the push for permanent African representation on the United Nations Security Council, a move aimed at ensuring Africa had a voice in major global decisions. This shift symbolized Africa's emergence as an equal partner on the world stage. Africa's journey was far from over, but the direction was clear. a continent rising, a people empowered, and a future defined by its own terms. The challenges ahead were real, but so was the resilience, creativity, and determination of its people. Would Africa fully embrace its potential and build a self-reliant future? Could the dreams of unity, prosperity, and technological excellence become reality? The answers lay not in the hands of external powers, but within Africa itself. And as the sun rose over the vast savannas, bustling cities, and ancient landscapes, one thing remained certain. As Africa marches forward, the vision for the continent is no longer just about resilience, but about dominance in innovation, governance, and cultural influence. The coming decades present opportunities for Africa to assert itself not just as a participant in global affairs, but as a leader shaping the world's future. From economic prowess to technological breakthroughs, from political evolution to cultural supremacy, Africa stands on the precipice of an era where it defines its own destiny. Africa's technological landscape is evolving at an unprecedented pace. With the rise of tech hubs in Nairobi, Lagos, Cape Town and Kigali, the continent is proving itself as a powerhouse of digital transformation. The expansion of artificial intelligence, blockchain, and the Internet of Things is no longer limited to the West. African-led companies are now at the forefront of innovation, creating tailored solutions for local and global challenges. With the African Union's digital transformation strategy, countries are investing heavily in internet infrastructure and digital literacy. The rise of mobile banking and fintech solutions has allowed millions of Africans to access financial services, empowering entrepreneurs and small businesses to thrive. With AI-driven solutions improving agriculture, healthcare and logistics, the dream of a tech-driven Africa is becoming a reality. The African Continental Free Trade Area is set to be the world's largest free trade zone, uniting over 50 countries under a single economic umbrella. This initiative has the potential to eliminate trade barriers, create millions of jobs, and accelerate industrialization. Africa's vast resources, from oil and minerals to agricultural produce, are being utilized more strategically, with countries investing in local manufacturing and value addition. Instead of merely exporting raw materials, African nations are focusing on building processing plants, refineries and advanced industrial complexes to ensure they benefit from the full economic value of their resources. Foreign direct investment continues to flow into Africa, with global superpowers recognizing the continent's potential as the next economic frontier. However, African leaders are negotiating deals that favor sustainability, fair trade and long-term benefits, ensuring that economic partnerships empower local industries rather than exploit them. Africa's political landscape is witnessing a shift towards greater accountability, transparency and governance. While corruption and instability have historically plagued many nations, recent years have seen significant reforms aimed at strengthening democratic institutions. The African Union and regional blocs such as ECOWAS, SADC and EAC are enforcing stricter policies to prevent coups and election fraud. Digital voting systems and blockchain-based electoral processes are being introduced to ensure fair elections and curb political manipulation. Furthermore, the rise of youth-led political movements is redefining governance. Young leaders are challenging the status quo, pushing for policies that focus on development, environmental sustainability and inclusive economic growth. Africa's cultural impact is reaching every corner of the world. Afrobeats, Afro house and Amapiano dominate global music charts, with African artists headlining major international festivals. Nollywood, once seen as a local industry, now rivals Hollywood and Bollywood in both production and storytelling excellence. African designers and fashion brands are being showcased on global runways, redefining trends and promoting indigenous styles. Museums across Europe and the Americas are facing growing pressure to return stolen African artifacts, leading to a new era of cultural reclamation and heritage restoration. The rise of streaming services has further propelled African storytelling onto the global stage. Movies and TV shows from Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana and Kenya are attracting global audiences, challenging stereotypes and presenting authentic African narratives. Education remains the cornerstone of Africa's transformation. Countries are prioritizing STEM education, vocational training and digital skills development to prepare the workforce for the fourth industrial revolution. African universities are collaborating with international institutions to enhance research capabilities. Investments in AI-driven learning platforms and e-learning initiatives are bridging educational gaps, ensuring that even remote communities have access to quality education. The rise of African think tanks and research institutions is also contributing to global knowledge production, with African scholars leading discussions on climate change, geopolitics and economic sustainability. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of self-reliance in healthcare. Africa is now investing in vaccine production, biotechnology and pharmaceutical research to ensure that future pandemics do not leave the continent vulnerable. Nations such as Senegal, Rwanda and South Africa are leading in medical innovations, producing vaccines and developing advanced healthcare infrastructure. Telemedicine services are expanding, ensuring that even the most remote communities receive adequate healthcare. Additionally, traditional African medicine is gaining global recognition, with research institutions exploring the medicinal properties of indigenous herbs and treatments. With climate change posing a serious threat to Africa's ecosystems, the continent is taking a proactive stance in sustainability. The expansion of renewable energy projects is ensuring that Africa becomes a global leader in green energy. Countries like Kenya and Morocco are investing in solar, wind and hydroelectric power, reducing reliance on fossil fuels and setting examples for sustainable development. The Great Green Wall Initiative, aimed at combating desertification, continues to restore degraded lands and promote agricultural resilience. Africa is no longer just a spectator in global affairs. It is demanding a seat at the table. The push for permanent representation on the UN Security Council is gaining traction, ensuring that African nations have a say in global decision-making. Strategic partnerships with China, the European Union, the United States and emerging economies are being negotiated on more equal terms. African nations are also strengthening South-South cooperation, forming alliances with Latin American and Asian nations to create a more balanced global order. The vision for Africa is clear: a self-reliant, innovative and globally influential continent. The challenges ahead are significant, but so are the opportunities. The key to Africa's future lies in its people, the dreamers, the innovators, the leaders, and the communities that refuse to be defined by the past. Will Africa fully harness its potential to become a superpower of the 21st century? The answer lies in the choices made today. As Africa continues its journey, one thing remains certain. The next great chapter of global history will be written in Africa. As Africa continues its transformative journey, a profound renaissance of African identity is taking shape. This resurgence is not just about reconnecting with history, but redefining what it means to be African in the 21st century. With a new wave of cultural consciousness sweeping across the continent and its diaspora, African identity is being reclaimed, celebrated and projected onto the global stage. From the revival of indigenous languages to the rise of Pan-African movements, Africa is embracing its roots while forging a bold future. Schools across the continent are integrating African history and philosophy into their curriculums, ensuring that future generations grow up with a deep understanding of their heritage. Festivals, literature and digital storytelling platforms are amplifying the voices of African creatives, offering narratives that counter centuries of misrepresentation. Social media has played a crucial role in this cultural revival. Young Africans are using digital platforms to challenge stereotypes and redefine African aesthetics. Hashtags like #AfricaRising, #BlackExcellence and #WearAfrica have sparked global discussions, uniting Africans and the diaspora in celebrating their heritage. The fusion of traditional and contemporary elements in fashion, music and visual arts is creating a unique cultural expression that resonates worldwide. Beyond culture, a political awakening is reshaping governance across the continent. A new generation of leaders, unburdened by colonial-era politics, is emerging. These leaders prioritize development, economic growth and technological innovation while advocating for stronger democratic institutions. Nations like Botswana, Ghana and Rwanda have demonstrated that good governance leads to prosperity. The fight against corruption is intensifying, with digital transparency initiatives exposing financial mismanagement and empowering citizens to hold their leaders accountable. Pan-Africanism is experiencing a revival as countries collaborate more closely to solve continental challenges. The African Union's Agenda 2063, which envisions a united, prosperous Africa, is steadily taking shape. Infrastructure projects, such as the Trans-African highways and railway networks, are boosting trade and connectivity, bringing African nations closer together than ever before. Africa's economic revolution is gaining momentum. The rapid expansion of startups, fintech solutions and e-commerce is transforming how Africans do business. Mobile money platforms like M-Pesa and Flutterwave have revolutionized financial transactions, giving millions access to banking services that were once out of reach. With the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA, in full effect, intra-African trade is expected to skyrocket. The removal of tariffs and barriers has made it easier for African businesses to access markets across the continent, fostering industrialization and economic independence. Diaspora investment is also fueling growth. African descendants in the United States, the Caribbean and Europe are increasingly investing in real estate, technology and agriculture, helping to bridge the economic gap between Africa and the rest of the world. The rise of Buy Black, Buy African movements has further strengthened economic empowerment initiatives. Africa is no longer just a consumer of technology. It is becoming a creator and innovator. The continent's youth are leading a tech revolution, with innovation hubs like Silicon Savannah in Kenya and Yabacone Valley in Nigeria, producing cutting-edge solutions in fintech, health tech and artificial intelligence. Renewable energy innovations are ensuring that Africa does not repeat the industrial mistakes of the West. Solar farms in Morocco, geothermal plants in Kenya, and hydroelectric projects in Ethiopia are providing sustainable energy solutions that power industries and households alike. One of the most significant movements of the 21st century is the fight for the return of stolen African artifacts. For centuries, colonial powers looted Africa's cultural heritage, displaying sacred objects in European and American museums. Today, African nations are demanding their return, and many institutions are responding. Museums in France, Germany and the United Kingdom have begun repatriating artifacts, acknowledging Africa's rightful ownership. The construction of modern African museums and cultural centres is providing spaces where these treasures can be preserved and appreciated by future generations. Africa's influence in the global entertainment industry has never been stronger. Afrobeats, Amapiano and Afro House dominate international charts, with artists like Burna Boy, Wizkid and Thames receiving Grammy Awards and global recognition. African filmmakers are breaking barriers, with Nollywood producing blockbuster films that rival Hollywood and Bollywood. Streaming platforms like Netflix, Showmax and Amazon Prime are investing heavily in African storytelling, allowing the world to experience authentic African narratives. This cultural dominance is not just about entertainment. It is a form of soft power that shapes global perceptions of Africa and its people. Africa is entering the space age. Countries like South Africa, Egypt and Nigeria are launching satellites, investing in aerospace technology and collaborating with global space agencies. The African Space Agency, or AFSA, is working towards launching Africa's first human space mission in the coming decades, proving that the continent is capable of scientific excellence. Space technology is also being used to solve real-world problems, with African satellites providing data for climate monitoring, agriculture and disaster management. This marks a turning point in Africa's self-reliance in technological advancement. As the effects of climate change become more severe, Africa is leading in sustainable solutions. The expansion of green energy projects, conservation initiatives, and sustainable farming practices is ensuring that Africa becomes a leader in the fight against environmental degradation. The Great Green Wall Project, an ambitious effort to combat desertification, continues to restore vast tracts of land, creating jobs and ensuring food security for millions. Urban centres are embracing eco-friendly designs, with smart cities emerging in Kigali, Accra and Nairobi. With its growing economic, technological and cultural power, Africa is positioning itself as a future global superpower. The push for permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council is gaining momentum, ensuring Africa has a voice in major global decisions. Africa's diplomatic influence is also rising. The continent is increasingly involved in international negotiations on trade, climate change and security, ensuring its interests are represented on the global stage. The African Renaissance is no longer a distant dream, it is happening now. With a young dynamic population and a rich cultural and intellectual heritage, Africa's future is bright. The road ahead is not without challenges, but Africa's ability to overcome adversity, innovate and lead will shape the world for generations to come. As the continent continues to rise, one question remains.